The palm trees of Carpinteria danced in the trade winds as the couple strolled barefoot along the beach. The surf flowed between their fingers as if reflecting their feelings of love, marking their 25th wedding anniversary, albeit 7 weeks late. The bright moon cast shadows around them, illuminating the white rocks and waves. Looking into the southern sky at the pale planet, the wife asked, "Is it full?" "I don't think so," Will replied. "Tomorrow, I guess. But she's beautiful." "So big," Terry added. "More than Pennsylvania, right? I have a feeling something strange is going to happen." He gently touched her bare shoulders, played with the thin straps of her dress, feeling the warmth accumulated under the tropical sun. "Are you okay? Aren't you badly burned?" "No, not at all," Terry replied. On this day, the first day of their vacation in a Caribbean resort intended mainly for couples, she sunbathed topless for the first time in her life. To protect herself from the scorching rays, she applied sunscreen liberally to her chest. She remembered with pleasure how, hidden behind sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, she watched male tourists furtively appreciating her bare breasts and the skimpy bikini bottoms that Will had convinced her to buy for the trip. Although she was no longer a young girl, it was obvious that she remained attractive. This knowledge made her happy. When she shared her observations with Will, he asked her which of the men she liked. It was their game, never taken seriously. After they returned to the room, Terry, still nervous from the attention she had received, thought about intimacy, but by the time she had showered and dressed up for him, Will was already dozing, occasionally snorting in his sleep. She let him rest by reading her New Yorker and home decor magazines, then woke him up with a cocktail and a late dinner of local seafood. After dinner in the dark, they went for a walk, exploring the resort's lush tropical surroundings before she assumed they'd be back in the room for their traditional hour of 11:30 p.m., and maybe, if she was lucky, a little passion. But suddenly the calm was broken by the echo of steel drums coming from behind the dunes and floating over the pool. "How about another drink?" Will suggested. "Okay," Terry agreed. "Maybe we should dance." "If you insist." Will didn't like dance floors. There were too many people. He felt awkward because of his funny moves. The couple found their shoes at the base of the palm tree and went to the dance floor, where other couples were already dancing, drowning in tropical romance. The band played one of Terry's favorite Burt Bacharach songs, evoking memories of her youth spent with former lovers. They found a table under an umbrella by the pool and ordered drinks. A margarita for him, a blue Jamaican for her. Without waiting for drinks, the couple hit the dance floor, dancing to a mixture of classical and reggae. Terry was glad that Will gave in so easily and allowed her body to relax, like in the distant days when she attended discos in the 70s. After 4 or 5 songs, she felt sweat starting to form. "Have you danced enough?" Will asked as the local version of country music started playing. Of course, Terry agreed reluctantly. The tourists returned to their table and greedily drained their drinks. A few songs later, the band began playing "Ring My Bell," one of Terry's favorite disco songs. "Do you want to go out again?" she suggested. "In a few minutes, we'll put it off. I think I better go to the bathroom first." Will usually danced a little and then called it a night. Terry was disappointed. She had hoped to dance the night away. She noticed that Will was a little unsteady as he headed to the toilet. It was probably after an afternoon beer and a bottle of wine with dinner that the alcohol began to take its toll. Well, let it be. Their room was very close, a few steps away. Let him get drunk if he wants. After all, they are on vacation. Will headed to the toilet, admiring the costumes of the tourists. One young woman seemed to have forgotten to wear a bra under her sheer blouse, and her breasts jiggled slightly as she laughed at a joke. He wondered if other men looked at his wife the same way he looked at their wives. Returning to the table, he discovered that his wife was missing. She had probably also gone to the toilet. Will sat down, watching the beautiful women dancing, admiring their movements as the band continued to play disco. Suddenly, he noticed how the blue and white waves of her dress flashed through the crowd. She was back on the dance floor, playing with the hem of her dress, lifting it above her knees and showing off a little thigh. It was a successful maneuver that made her look sexier than she actually was. The crowd parted a little, and Will noticed her partner, a middle-aged man in moccasins, neatly tailored trousers, and a floral shirt of dubious taste. He had thinning hair. The music slowed down for a moment, and then came back to life with another song from the 80s. Terry caught his eye and began to walk back to the table to be with her husband. Will waved at her, a gesture that clearly meant, "Stay there, have fun." She accepted the gift, took her new partner's hand, and returned to the dance floor. Will realized that this man was a much better dancer than himself. Other husbands might have been jealous in this situation, but Will was simply glad that his wife had found someone who could compliment her on the dance floor. When the band finished playing and took a break, Terry returned to the table, leading her new acquaintance. "Will, this is Jonathan." "Jonathan, Will," she introduced them to each other. "Jonathan asked me to dance while you were away. I thought you wouldn't mind." "Of course not," Will replied. "Jonathan, join us." "Are you sure?" Jonathan asked. "I don't want to be superfluous." "On the contrary, sit down," Will suggested. We ordered a drink for Jonathan and started talking. They learned that Jonathan was visiting from Chicago on vacation, and Will and Terry talked about their life in suburban Pennsylvania, about the old Victorian house that required constant maintenance, and about their jobs. Will was a computer technician and Terry was a high school teacher. When another round of drinks arrived, the band returned to the stage, now playing more reggae. It was obvious that Terry felt the beats and wanted to get back on the dance floor. "Why don't you take her out again?" Will suggested to Jonathan. "This is not my music." Seeing his completely faithful wife dancing with another man brought back fantasies he'd been carrying around for years. Maybe tonight is that night. Again she circled and fell into rhythm with her partner, playing with symbols of sexual desire, and Will was glad that she was enjoying herself. Jonathan moved with her, clearly fascinated by this woman. 3 or 4 fast songs passed bouncy 70s tunes, and Will became fascinated by images of what might happen. When the slow song started playing, Terry and Jonathan returned to the table. "My turn," Will demanded. "Don't go far," he told Jonathan. "We won't be long." When they were among the other dancers, he pulled his wife closer to him, waited a minute, and then began to share his thoughts. "You seem to like Jonathan." "He's a good dancer," Terry admitted. "Do you think he's cute?" "Sort of," she answered, uncertainly, not understanding where this conversation was leading. "Listen," Will continued, realizing that he only had a few minutes to say everything. "You know how we discussed that you could be with another man. Perhaps this is a good time to try." She remembered the hundreds of times he had fantasized about her making love to another man. Most often she played this game, making up stories about how she would meet a man at a bar, have a drink with him, and then go to his house to sleep with him. To her, it was only an exciting game, but to Will, it was a real desire, and one day, more out of a desire to please him than from her own motives, she agreed that she would do it if the right moment presented itself. Since then, he has occasionally flirted with the topic, never insisting, but challenging. "Is this really the moment?" she thought. "Do you want me to go to bed with him?" The question was cautious, with notes of tension. "If you want," Will responded. "He likes you, it's obvious, and you like him too. We are far from everyone who knows us, and no one will ever know. This is an ideal opportunity." He fell silent, waiting for an answer, which did not come. It suddenly seemed to him that he might have crossed the line. "If you don't want to, that's okay," he hastened to add. "But if you ever want to do it." She realized that if she simply refused, he would return to this conversation again and again, reproaching her for intractability for years. "I'll think about it," she said as the music began to speed up. "I don't promise anything." "Okay," he agreed. "Remember how you once said that it would take something special for you to even think about this." He waited for her nod, then pointed to a bright yellow ball shining from the sky. What could be more unusual than a full moon over the Caribbean? They returned to the table. Jonathan was waiting for them, and for a while the three of them carried on a tense conversation, shouting over the loud music. "I'll go to the toilet," Will said, leaving Terry and Jonathan alone. He took his time, giving them the opportunity to get closer. As he washed his hands, his eyes fell on the condom dispenser. Thinking it might come in handy, he bought a couple of packages and put them in his pocket. On the way back, he chose a different path, on the other side of the pool, hoping to see them unnoticed. For some time he could not find them, and was already beginning to worry that Terry had made a decision and was now heading with Jonathan to his room. But here they are again on the dance floor. Now she was even more liberated. Her movements became bolder, the dress rode up higher, almost to her hips, exposing her hips, and Jonathan pressed her closer to him, clasping her waist. Watching them from afar, Will felt that this might be the moment when she would finally decide to take a lover. For a moment he wanted to just leave, give them a chance to continue, but then he was afraid that Terry would think something had happened to him and start looking for him, abandoning Jonathan. And curiosity overcame him. He wanted to see what would happen next. He returned to the table. Terry met his gaze from the dance floor, winked, but had no intention of returning. As the band began playing a slow song, Will watched with joy as Terry melted into Jonathan's arms, pressing her chest against his body. They seemed to lose themselves in this closeness, and Will become excited when Jonathan moved his hand from her waist a little lower to her buttocks. While dancing with the stranger, Terry pondered Will's proposal. On the one hand, she felt uneasy at the thought of cheating on him after so many years of loyalty. On the other hand, Jonathan was attractive, not like David Duchovny, but he had a certain charm. This fantasy had been Will's for the most part, but now she realized she was getting caught up in it too. She remembered fondly the men she had been with before she met Will and the excitement they brought. She wondered, what would it be like to be with another man again? What will it be like to feel someone else's body next to you? And she thought about her husband, how he was always turned on by their conversations about this in the bedroom. Perhaps it would please both of them if she finally granted his wish. Warmed up by the rum and the romantic surroundings, she began to think that perhaps he was right. This was indeed a good moment. But Jonathan, of course, had to agree too. Maybe he won't want to have a loving relationship with her. Besides, she was still tormented by doubts. What if Will wasn't completely serious? What if it was just a game? The music sped up again. Jonathan whispered in her ear, "I need to go away for a while, I'll be back soon," and headed towards the toilet. Terry returned to Will, sat down next to him, and put her hand on his arm. "That last dance was very sexy," Will noted. "You liked being with him, didn't you? I see it." She looked Will directly in the eyes, trying to catch his true emotions. "Are you sure you want me to go with him? Do you want me to make love to him? We've discussed this so many times, Terry. I don't think you'll ever feel so free, so relaxed." "I really think you should try," he replied, noticing her hesitation. "What's wrong?" Terry looked down. Her words seemed to rise from the depths of her soul. "I just need to know that this won't cause us problems later, that everything will be okay." Will took out the packages he had bought. "I bought this for you. Take them as a sign that everything will be okay, okay?" She smiled at the tender gesture, kissed him like a loving wife, and agreed. "Okay, if he doesn't mind, I agree." Quickly, so that no one would notice, she hid the condoms in her purse. For the last time, not knowing whether she was hoping for a yes or no, she asked, "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I hope you have fun." Terry smiled, accepted his answer, and put the condoms in her purse. "If he's ready, I'll try," she thought. A few seconds later, Jonathan approached them. "Where did Will go?" he asked. "He was a little tired and decided to go back to his room," Terry explained. "But he told us to keep having fun." Jonathan nodded, accepting the explanation. "Another dance?" he suggested. The music had lost its appeal, and the band was finishing its last batch of songs. "No, thank you," Terry refused. "Maybe we can go for a walk." "Great idea," Jonathan agreed. Terry slung her purse over her shoulder, and they left the dance floor, leaving behind the few remaining dancers and the music. As they talked about how they found out about the resort, Terry tried to remember how she had once seduced men, but decades had flown by, and it was difficult for her to remember. She wondered how to find out if Jonathan liked her and how to express her feelings to him. They came across a wall covered in greenery and huge saffron-colored flowers, the largest Terry had ever seen. She stepped towards the hedge and inhaled the scent of one of the flowers. A small lizard appeared on top of the wall, just a few centimeters from Terry's face, causing her to scream and jump back. Jonathan was there to catch her and keep her from falling. "Don't be afraid, it's just a lizard, it won't harm you," he gently reassured her. Terry was still shaking, but Jonathan put his arm around her and led her to a nearby bench. They sat down on the bench, and he asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes, everything is fine," she answered, clinging to him. "I like it when your hand hugs me." She calmed down and relaxed in his arms. He felt her warmth and inhaled the scent of her hair. They both knew their first kiss was inevitable. Their lips connected and their tongues began to explore each other, gently but with increasing passion. Jonathan, feeling that this might be too much for a married woman, pulled away, but she whispered, "Don't stop." His lips moved down to her earlobe, nipping it lightly, and Terry's arms wrapped around his neck, urging him to continue. His palms began to caress her bare shoulders and neck, stroking her soft skin. He felt that she was ready for more, and his fingers slid to the neckline of her dress, paving the way to the valley between her breasts. She shifted slightly, and his palm filled her breast. A little embarrassed, still mindful of her wedding ring, he stroked her gently. Terry, feeling more confident, touched his thigh, grasping it through the fabric of his trousers, realizing how excited he was. She whispered, "Let's go to your room." "What about Will?" Jonathan asked, not used to such situations. "It's okay," she assured him. "He wants me to be with you. Please." They almost ran to his room, hurrying to be alone. Having crossed the threshold, Terry looked around. The room was spacious and decorated with rich fabrics and artwork. She put her purse on the coffee table and took out one condom. Then her gaze fell on the veranda, where she had a view of the sand and the ocean just a few meters away. Tall fences provide privacy, and wicker furniture, including a wide, backless sofa with high sides, seemed ideal for becoming their nest. She realized that this was exactly the place where she wanted to give herself to Jonathan. They sat on a bench, soft moonlight enveloped them. Once again their lips met in a kiss, but this time with more passion. Jonathan began to caress her hem, lifting her dress until she allowed him to remove her panties. While Jonathan caressed her, Terry did not stay away. Taking off his shirt, she threw her dress to the floor, remaining naked in front of him. She stood before him proudly, squaring her shoulders as if to demonstrate her readiness. Jonathan wasted no time in moving closer, and their bodies joined in a dance of passion. Jonathan sat opposite Terry on the bench, their eyes met, and at that moment something deep and tender arose between them. He reached out and gently placed her head on the armrest, then his fingers gently touched her arm. Their touches gradually became more conscious and sensual, conveying warmth and care to each other. Terry felt calm and relaxation spreading through her body. Every moment of their intimacy was filled with special meaning. Jonathan continued to gently touch her shoulders, then his hand smoothly moved to her back, giving her a feeling of support and comfort. Terry stood up a little, their movements were natural, as if they understood each other without words. She felt his presence, as if every touch helped her forget about all her worries. They were silent, but this silence had full meaning. Their bodies moved in rhythm, slowly, as if enjoying every moment of intimacy. A light breeze from the ocean gently touched their faces, and the sounds of nature became the background of their quiet connection. Jonathan stood up and Terry hugged him tightly, pressing herself against his shoulders. It was a moment of sincerity and trust, when they both knew that what was happening was not just physical intimacy, but something more. "It was wonderful," Jonathan said with a deep sense of satisfaction. "I'm glad you liked it," she replied. "It was great for me too. I can't even believe how happy I am now. You looked so surprised when I wanted to come here." "A little," he admitted. "The last time something like this happened to me was back in college." "Tell me what happened then," Terry asked. "I was a teaching assistant. My boss was a professor, a married woman. One evening, while we were working late in the laboratory, I was focused on the results of the research, when suddenly I felt her hand on the back of my head. A minute later, she was already lying on the table. Her skirt had hiked up, and we got down to it right on the mountain of papers. After that, every time I came to work, I didn't know what was waiting for me. Either a severe reprimand for mistakes or sex on the table. It really does sound like something out of a Cinemax movie, doesn't it? And tonight is like a scene from Red Shoe Diaries, Terry added with a smile. Can I ask you something? Jonathan suddenly asked. Why me? You mean why did I choose you? She clarified. Yes, why did you decide to come with me? Terry thought for a moment, trying to understand why she had finally agreed to something that she had always refused to do before. She finally said, You dance well. Jonathan was satisfied with this answer and asked further. Does will often share you with other men. Not that I'm complaining, of course. Terry laughed. Sometimes I think he would like that. He dreamed about this for years, but this is the first time I agreed. Is it true? Jonathan asked in surprise. Yes, Terry confirmed. This is the first time I've done something like this. Tell me about it, Jonathan asked. At the beginning of our marriage, when Will was often on the road, there was flirting. My old boyfriends called, and I went out for drinks with them. But when they started pestering me, I pushed them away. I'm married to the perfect man, and I didn't want to ruin everything. But over the years, I stopped caring about my appearance. It seemed to me that I no longer looked so attractive. All the men knew that I was seriously married, and no one paid attention to me anymore. And then Will started asking if I was interested in other men. I was not interested, but it excited him to discuss it, and I allowed him. Then he began to encourage me, but I had neither the desire nor the real opportunity. Moreover, my sexual desire dropped dramatically after I gained a lot of excess weight. As she spoke, she gently stroked Jonathan, feeling his body come to life again. But recently I lost weight again and noticed that men began to pay attention to me. Will noticed this too, and we started talking about affairs again. I was nervous. I didn't think I would dare to do this. But when Will saw us dancing today, he suggested I try again. You seemed interested, so I decided why not. And I'm the lucky one who got it, Jonathan added. Thank your lucky stars. Terry looked towards the open door to the terrace, saw the moon approaching the horizon, and corrected him. I would rather thank the lucky moon. Terry and Jonathan continued to enjoy their intimacy, their movements becoming slower and more deliberate, full of mutual desire and tenderness. Jonathan leaned towards her, his lips lightly touching her neck, his arms wrapped around her figure, creating a feeling of unity and warmth. He lay down next to her, gently touching her body, studying her every response. Their gazes met, and it seemed that at that moment the whole world ceased to exist. As they changed positions, their bodies easily adapted to each other, moving in harmony. Terry felt protected in his arms, trusting him and enjoying every moment. Their touches became more sensual, but did not lose the sincere intimacy they had built. She felt his breath, his warmth, and it brought her peace and joy. After a long time spent in this quiet dance, they stopped, lying next to each other and feeling their hearts beating in the same rhythm. Instead of words, they exchanged warm smiles, enjoying the comfortable silence and inner satisfaction from their closeness. Now calmed down, they simply lay there, hugging each other, happy to be near each other. They might even have dozed off. Terry felt Jonathan stir and get out of bed. From the bathroom, she heard his voice. Do you want anything from the minibar? No, I don't think so. But she immediately changed her mind. Maybe some juice. One orange juice, I'll bring it now. She felt rather than see him in the dim light as he approached the small refrigerator. As he opened the door to get the drinks, she watched him, his nakedness in the glare of the light bulb almost gleefully obscene to her. She stood up and accepted the glass. What time is it? I'll take a look now, Jonathan said, turning on the bedside lamp and picking up his watch. Almost 5. Oh, God. She stretched, kneading her stiff muscles. Jonathan watched with pleasure her graceful body, her breasts slightly sagging from age. I'm sorry to say this, but I guess it's time to go. Can't you stay? He asked pleadingly. I would like to, but it's not worth it. May I accompany you? She liked this proposal because a woman always feels a little insecure at night. I would like that, yes. Jonathan collected their clothes from the balcony. A little embarrassed as the magic of the night began to dissipate, she pulled the dress over her head, hiding the body she had just so joyfully revealed to him. They left the love nest and began to walk in the dark. Did you see the waterfall? He suggested. No, I saw it on the map, but we didn't get to it yesterday. It's not far, he said. Let's go. They turned the corner, the path leading close to the beach. In front of them, the sky began to brighten. The black color was replaced by cobalt, then indigo. Behind them, above their left shoulders, the moon, almost touching the horizon, illuminated the lovers goldenly. 300 steps led them to a slight descent, the soft light of electric bulbs illuminating the stairs. The sound of rushing water competed with the chirping of birds, waking each other up for the coming dawn. Terry was delighted with this forest clearing. A milky white waterfall fell over a 20-foot cliff, creating ripples on the surface of the pool. Dozens of turtles dozed on logs, fish stirred the water, looking for breakfast. They sat on a bench and watched this live performance. Remembering the passion they had just experienced, their bodies were drawn to each other again, their lips finding each other again. Someone's hand slid under the skirt, parting the folds of the clothing. Passion began to take over them again, but suddenly the sound of running feet was heard. The early morning runner was making his presence felt. They quickly pulled away from each other, interrupting their passionate outburst. Really, Terry said awkwardly, I really need to go home. They walked back along the same path, past his room and around the pool. Waiters dressed in white jackets were already preparing tables for breakfast, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung around. The portable dance floor and the band's musical instruments had already been put away, awaiting sunset when they would once again immerse the other lovers in their magic. Has it really only been 5 hours since she met Jonathan? It seemed to Terry that whole days had passed. Between the palm trees, the last ray of the moon dived below the horizon, swallowed up by the Caribbean Sea. The magic of the night is officially over. They walked slowly along the path to her room, holding each other. I'd like to see you again, Jonathan said. I would like this too, but I don't know. It's up to Will. I thought he encouraged you to be with me. Yes, he encouraged me, but it was last night, under the influence of the night and alcohol. We've never done this before, and I'm not sure he'll want to do it again. Will you ask him? Oh, of course, she said, pulling him towards her for the last, most tender kiss of the night. They pulled away and Jonathan pulled a business card from his pocket. I'll be here for 2 more days, he explained. If you want, just come and knock on my door. Or call, leave a message if I'm not there. If we can't meet here, or if anything changes, call me in Chicago. Let's see. No promises. They had already come almost close to her room. I had a great time, she said, and I will never forget you. I really hope we see each other again. Let's see. She knew he wanted another hug, but it was time to say goodbye. Good night, she said, walking away from him. You meant to say good morning, he corrected her, and then disappeared. Approaching the door, Terry thought about her husband. How will he accept the fact that she is no longer pure, no longer innocent? A wave of guilt began to enter her thoughts, but she pushed it away, remembering that it was his wish. He begged her to cheat on him. In a way, he was just as guilty, and perhaps even more, than she was. Terry cleaned herself up. She wanted to look decent in front of her man, not like a woman who had spent the whole night in nowhere. Taking a small mirror from her purse, she combed her hair and touched up her lipstick. The rest, she realized, would have to be left as is. She opened the door carefully, nervous about what might happen inside. Will was stretched out on the bed, naked under the sheets, as always, even in winter. His deep breathing indicated that he was dozing. As quietly as possible, Terry took a short nightgown from the closet and closed the bathroom door behind her. Another sponge bath, brushing of teeth, a sip of water, and she was ready for bed. She climbed into bed next to Will, and he stirred. "What time is it?" She glanced at the alarm clock by the bed. 5:30, dawn. "Have you just arrived?" "Yes." She pressed herself against him, face to face, in their favorite cuddling position. Will yawned. "Did you like it?" "Yes," she admitted with slight shyness. "I really liked it. You were right. I should have done this a long time ago." It was said with pleasure, but at the same time it reminded him that he was just as guilty as she was. "Did you sleep with him?" From his voice, it was clear that this was just a question, not a reproach. She turned her face over her shoulder, looked at her husband, with whom she had lived for a quarter of a century, and kissed him. "Yes. Do you want me to tell you about it?" In all the fantasies they built together, he always wanted to know the details, the specifics, and she was ready to share the details of this evening if he wanted. "Yes," he begged, "if it's not too much trouble for you." For 5 minutes, she lay in his arms, talking about her first kiss, how she found herself naked in Jonathan's arms, how he caressed her, and then, on the bench, how she sat on him, allowed this stranger to have sex with her and experience pleasure. Her story excited Will. She wondered if he wanted to make love to her, and decided that she wouldn't mind if he did. She had never thought about sleeping with two men in one night before, and the thought seemed a little perverse. She even liked it. What happened next? Will encouraged her, thinking that the story did not end there. We hugged each other on the couch and talked. Then they made love again on the bed. Later we got up, walked around a bit, and then I came back here. She no longer wanted to continue discussing this topic. She realized that in the coming weeks they would probably pick apart each movement piece by piece. It didn't bother her, but not now. She turned to face him, kissed him, pressed her body against his body, trying to make it clear what she wanted now. "What did you do after I left?" "I came back here and tried to watch a movie, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about what you were doing." Then he went out for a walk. Then he came back again, tried to get some sleep, but kept waking up thinking about you. "Sorry," she said sympathetically. "No need to apologize. I'm happy for you. Can I ask you one more question?" "Certainly. Did you enjoy it?" They kissed again, passionately. "Yes," she admitted with slight embarrassment, "and it was strong." Will's hands began to explore her body, her breasts. She prepared herself to please him, to make him feel as good as she had in the last few hours. "One more question, and I'll leave it at that for today." "Okay," she agreed. "Do you want to see him again?" "A little," she admitted hesitantly. Even now she was embarrassed to admit to herself how much she wanted to be with both men. "Do you want me to meet him again?" "It's a full moon today," Will concluded strangely. Terry noticed that the temporary uptick in their sex life seemed to be fading. 5 weeks ago, after years of discussions, fantasies, and plans mostly at the instigation of her husband, she gave her body to another man to do with as he wished. At a Caribbean resort, she allowed a stranger named Jonathan to ask her to dance. 2 hours later, she found herself naked in his room. Will understood flirting, approved of it, even encouraged it. After those 2 nights of passion with Jonathan, amazing results followed. Will began to love her even more, bringing flowers, linen, and gifts for no particular reason. In the following weeks, their marital sex became more passionate. Terry, remembering how she was desired and taken by Jonathan, gained new confidence in lovemaking with her husband. At some point during the second night, Jonathan spent several minutes massaging her legs. At her request, Will now performed this erotic procedure for her. They discussed the incident endlessly until there was nothing new to remember. Will fully understood how Jonathan's touch had ignited Terry, how the first kiss had been unexpected, how different it felt from having someone else's penis penetrate her vagina. For her part, Terry understood the worry that filled Will's mind as he waited for her to return to the hotel room and thought she understood why there was little jealousy left in his soul. As a result, memories of her infidelity no longer excited Will or pushed Terry to new heights. Will, of course, noticed this, and when they cooled down a bit, he asked, "Have you been thinking about Jonathan?" No, about someone else, a long time ago. Tell me, he demanded lovingly. She looked at the candle burning on the table and began to remember. Paul was a year older than her from first grade. They played together in the sandbox. He was at her first cocktail party, which she threw back in school. While the record player was playing in her room, she hoped that Paul would ask her to the dance or even to the prom, but instead he started dating Julie, and it broke her heart. When she went to a small state college, Paul was there, studying finance, and she was studying English and Italian. Sometimes they ran into each other on campus by chance. Once, when Julie went to Pittsburgh for the weekend, he even invited her to a movie and then treated her to pie at a diner. When he drove her back to the dorm, she thought he wanted to kiss her, and she started to run her fingers through his blonde hair, but they were interrupted by one of her friends walking down the hallway. When she learned that he married Julie shortly after graduating from university, she was not surprised, but she was disappointed that she did not even receive an invitation to the wedding. Terry eventually graduated from high school and got a job teaching foreign languages at a school in the neighborhood that she once cheered for at football matches. She met with men who invited her, sometimes slept with them, waiting for her white knight to appear on the doorstep one day. One summer morning, she was driving her parents to the Amtrak station for their next trip to Las Vegas when her father asked, "Baby, can you take the car to get serviced while we're gone? I wanted to do this yesterday, but I didn't have time." She found herself in a dingy waiting room, leafing through old magazines, when suddenly she heard a familiar voice. "Terry, how many years, how many winters?" Her heart began to beat a little faster when she saw Paul with blonde hair and light freckles, the same one she had once considered the love of her youth. A few minutes after they started chatting, a mechanic approached them, giving Terry the keys to her car. Paul was informed that he would have to wait another 4 to 5 hours. He cursed quietly, complaining about the lost time, but then offered to make up for lost time and invited her to lunch if she agreed to give him a ride. Over lunch, they discussed her life, how she loved her job with high school students, how her parents were enjoying retirement, and in response to his direct question that no, she wasn't dating anyone. Paul talked about his career as a banker, that he plays softball on Mondays and Thursdays, and in response to her mocking question, he answered that yes, he and Julie were fine. However, from the way he said it and from his dimmed gaze, Terry realized that not everything was as good as he said. The conversation turned to memories of childhood, how they played hide and seek in the backyard, catching fireflies, and Paul suddenly admitted, "I don't know why I didn't try harder to start dating you," which made her feel warm and desirable. When lunch was over, she inadvertently let slip that she needed to stop by her parents' house to water the plants and pick up the mail. When he asked if he could go with her, he had nothing better to do anyway, and would be glad to see her parents' house again. She found no reason to refuse. While she was doing small things, he wandered around the house, looking at photographs on the walls, remembering children's parties. In the damp basement, he followed her there. His arms suddenly embraced her, and she raised her face, accepting his kiss. But she soon interrupted him, not because she did not want to continue, but because, as she reminded him, he was still a married man. Paul took her refusal with dignity, sadly said that he understood, and let her go. They walked up the stairs, and Terry returned to her work in the kitchen. Paul closed the bathroom door behind him to avoid awkwardness. She continued to go about her business, but her heart was beating faster and her face was burning. When she heard the bathroom door open, she prayed that he wouldn't come near her. She wasn't sure she could resist again. Fortunately, she did not hear his steps, and soon familiar chords from her youth reached her ears. Eagles began to play in her room. "Oh, I love the Eagles," she exclaimed. When she joined him, carrying a glass of lemonade, he was sitting on the floor, flipping through her old records. She sat next to him, recalling the happy moments associated with the popular songs of that time. As he reached out for one of the records, they were both overcome with desire. Passion overtook them quickly. In less than 5 minutes they were naked, and Paul was already having sex with her. They continued to kiss, and without covering themselves with clothes, listened to the rock and roll of their youth. It was time to return to the car service, and they got dressed. She tidied up the bed, put away the wet napkins so that her mother would never know what happened in this room, because this was the first time Terry made love in her parents' house. When she dropped Paul off back at the workshop, he didn't try to kiss her goodbye in case someone saw her. But still he asked if they could meet again. She doubted that this was wise, but he ignored her hesitation and promised to call. To Terry's surprise, he actually called, and one evening, after telling Julie he was working late, Paul arrived at her place with 2 portions of spaghetti and a bottle of wine. They indulged in unbridled passion until he said that it was time for him to go home so as not to arouse his wife's suspicion. For 23 weeks they shared their bodies and, a little, their souls. When she told her best friend about this, she also admitted that she was afraid that Paul would never leave his wife, and their romance was doomed to fail. Although they both spoke of love to each other in private moments, one day, after one last violent act of passion, Paul tearfully confessed that Julie was pregnant. He was unhappy, but understood that they would have to end the relationship. Paul cried, but Terry didn't cry. Then no, but she cried for many weeks after that. With the dim candlelight illuminating his wife's beautiful face, Will asked, "And you never saw him again?" "No, he called a couple of times, trying to meet, but I didn't let him come back." "Did you want him to come back?" "Of course I did," Terry explained. "Before I met you, it was the best sex of my life. But I knew that this was a temporary hobby for him, and I had to let him go." "I'm glad you did," Will said. "Otherwise you might not have married me." "Oh, you don't have to worry about that," Terry muttered, and soon soft breathing indicated that she had fallen asleep. A few weeks later, Terry was taking a late bath, something she often did when she desired her husband, when Will walked into the bathroom. "Would you like me to rub your back?" he suggested. "Of course," she agreed. After he lathered her shoulders, Will moved to her breasts, caressing them gently before his hand moved down. Terry relaxed in the warm water, allowing Will to do whatever he wanted with her. Will suggested, "Imagine it's not me, but another man." Without saying a word, Terry plunged into the fantasy world they often visited together. And again she heard Will's voice, "Describe the man you are with now." She thought for a moment. "He's taller than you, blonde. He has incredibly long fingers." "Is this Paul?" asked Will. "Do you want it to be Paul?" she answered, feeling his nod of approval. "Okay, this is Paul." Over the next hour, they played the game and Paul mastered her again, this time in their marital bedroom in the Victorian house she shared with her husband. While Terry confessed how much she wanted to make love with her ex-lover again, her husband played the role of her admirer. Afterwards, they hugged, and Will asked, as always, "Are you okay?" "Yes, sure. You were amazing today." "You too," he agreed. "You liked pretending you were with Paul again, didn't you?" "Yes," she admitted a little shyly. "After I told you about him the other day, I started thinking about him again." "I thought so too," Will said. "Yes," Terry drawled. Sometimes, when Will thought, it was a good idea, but sometimes not so much. "Would you really like to be with Paul again?" "I don't know," she answered carefully. "Maybe." "Why not?" Will insisted softly. "Well," Terry began, "it's been such a long time. Maybe he has changed. Perhaps he won't want me. I'm not as beautiful as I was then. And besides, he's probably still married." "You're married too," Will reminded. "As for the rest, I'm sure he'll still be interested in you. You're still very, very attractive, you know. And you'll never know if you want him again until you meet him." Terry thought for a moment. "I don't even know how to find him." "I already found that out. I have his home number. He still lives in Penn Hills. He hasn't moved anywhere in all these years. And he still works at the same bank." "Is it true?" Terry thought about it for a few seconds. "Do you really want me to sleep with him again like I did with Jonathan?" "If you want it. Why don't you call him one day, invite him for a drink? If everything works out, great. If not—" "Let me think," Terry avoided. And again she fell asleep in the arms of her true lover, her husband. She hesitated for 3 months, deciding whether to call the number Will had given her. She just wasn't clear if this was the right idea. Will suggested that she have another lover. It had been part of their fantasies for years, and yes, she had given in to it one day on a Caribbean island fueled by romance and alcohol. It worked then, but now she's back to reality. Everything could develop into a romance. When she discussed this with Will, he simply waved his hand. So what if that's the case? We will still love each other. We won't get divorced because of this. Don't you believe that you can love two people at once? Even when she finally agreed that it was worth a try and comply with Will's insistent requests, just call him, we'll see what happens. She picked up the phone several times, but each time at the last moment she hung up without dialing the number. The fifth time, she held out and waited until she heard a voice on the answering machine. "Hello, this is Paul Herbert from First Bank." But she never left a message. The next evening, when her office was already empty and the rest of the teachers had long gone home, she pulled herself together and tried again. This time she wanted to hang up again, but Paul answered quickly, and his voice carried to her. "Hi, it's Paul." For a few seconds, she didn't know what to say, and then she heard his voice again. "Hello?" "Oh, hi, Paul. This is Terry Neblett." No reaction is not good, she thought. I mean Terry Salvaggio from school. Do you remember me? She felt like a complete idiot. How could he know her by her married name? But his answer was warm and pleasant. "Terry, how nice it is to hear your voice again. How many years have passed? 25. 28, she corrected. Once, nervously, she even calculated it with an accuracy of almost minutes and seconds. "How are you?" "Wonderful. How are you?" "Great, everything is fine." The conversation stretched from the category of polite, insignificant conversations. He, apparently, did not understand why she called, and she was still embarrassed to voice her purpose. "So how can I help you, Terry?" he finally asked, perhaps thinking she was calling about some business matter or needing financial advice. She took a deep breath and made up her mind. "I've been thinking about you lately. Just wanted to know if you wanted to grab a drink sometime." "You know, that would be great," he responded enthusiastically. "I never forgot you." The meeting was set, and they agreed to meet at the restaurant where everyone went for the prom. On the day of the meeting, Wednesday, Terry left school early so she could go home and shower. She discussed the evening with Will, and he suggested wearing a low-cut blouse, but she chose a more modest dress. She went to the city where they once went to school, to the restaurant that was a symbol of youth for them. The first look at Paul did not give her the wave of romance that she had hoped for. He had gained a kilogram in each of the past 28 years. He wasn't fat, but slim certainly wasn't the right word for it. However, his suit was well-tailored, his white shirt and striped tie looked neat, and his thick hair, although gray, was still beautiful. "You haven't changed a bit," Paul lied, standing up to greet her. "And you're still beautiful," she stretched. They sat across from each other in a restaurant booth, ordered snacks and drinks, and began talking. "Oh, 2 kids. Yes, me too. Here, look at the photo. Did you attend your 25th anniversary reunion? I couldn't come." Barbara. "Oh, I heard that she went to California. I haven't heard anything about her for several years." Then Paul admitted, "Julie left me, that was probably 6 years ago. When Jason was a high school student. It's probably for the best. We're both tired of each other. She invited me to her wedding a couple of years ago, and I sent a card with a check. And you?" She waved her hand, showing her engagement ring. "Married to a truly wonderful man, Will, we couldn't be happier." The conversation continued easily over the next glass. "Do you remember how I met you at the auto repair shop?" asked Paul. "Certainly. And the rest of the day. It was a great time, Paul, over the next few months. For a long time, I was a little heartbroken. We were young, of course, and I didn't quite understand our relationship. I thought maybe you would leave Julie." "I know. Believe me, I thought about it. I made a mistake. I had to do it. We always seemed like kindred spirits, didn't we? Then, yes. Paul paid the bill, and he didn't even want to think about splitting it in half, and they left the restaurant. The late summer evening was warm, the sun just a few degrees away from setting behind the hills. Terry accepted an invitation to walk a few blocks to the park by the river. As they sat on the bench, watching the boats sail merrily by, Paul began his sales talk that Terry was hoping to hear. Do you remember when we had an affair? It may be wrong to say, but the way we made love was the best thing in my life. Is it true? Aren't you just saying it? No, it seemed like we were perfect for each other. This never happened with Julie. I remember it as a special time, too. She felt his hand on her shoulder and wondered if she should push her away, but decided not to. Tell me, do you have girlfriends now? There is one woman we sometimes meet. I wouldn't call it a relationship. And she? Not really. We talked about taking a step forward, but she is a widow only 3 years later, and her son still lives with her. We sometimes go to the movies or a play, and then. Terry didn't have to imagine much of what was meant by, and then. She told me that if I found someone else, it wouldn't be a problem. I'd like to see you again. At this, Paul's hand, which was not lying behind her back, gently patted her knee. To Terry's surprise, she felt her body react. If they weren't in a public place, maybe she would have turned to him, and they might have kissed. Terry would like that. And if the kiss had been as exciting as she remembered from the distant past, if Paul had suggested going to a hotel or his home, she thought she might agree. But that didn't happen because it was a public place, and she still remembered that she was happily married. To his question about the meeting, she gave an evasive answer. I don't know, Paul. I like this evening. I'm glad we met. I would like you to be my friend. With that statement, Paul wondered if she was being ambiguous. Did she hint that rekindling the romance was possible? He wanted her, that's for sure, and he didn't care that she was married to another man. We can be friends, Terry, as you wish. Tell you what, come to my house next week. I'll cook dinner for you. Do you remember that soup that my mother made, a recipe from her French grandmother? I have a recipe, and I'm pretty good at it. Come back next week, and I'll prepare it for you. Terry took the hint. There would be that wonderful soup she remembered from her youth, a bottle of wine or two, and then Paul would try to kiss her. Did she want this? Even though Will told her he didn't mind as long as it made her happy, was that a smart decision? Let me think, she avoided answering. They returned to the cars, and Paul opened the door for her, a gentlemanly gesture for which she rewarded him with a cool hug and a dry kiss on the cheek. On the way back home, she thought about her reactions, her wants and needs, what she would say to Will, who was definitely going to interrogate her. Did she want to spend an hour or two in bed with Paul? It was a simple answer. Her body had reacted when Paul touched her. She remembered how it had reacted decades ago, and she was sure that if she had let him, it would have reacted again. She remembered being with Jonathan, how the piquancy of the situation added spice to their lovemaking. Yes, she would have liked the physical side of flirting with Paul. But what then? Was he expecting an affair? Did she want an affair? Jonathan wasn't having an affair. When he left the resort, it was over. With Paul, it definitely won't be so clean and simple. She remembered the pain that followed their affair, how she cried and was depressed for weeks after, how her friends pitied her and tried to cheer her up. There was no way she wanted this to happen again. When she returned home, she was extremely tense. Will was waiting for her, curious about the meeting. We just had a drink and some light snacks. We talked a lot. No, I'm not hungry, but there is something I want. Take me to bed. She was aggressive with her husband, doing to him what her body insisted on doing to Paul. She made Will caress her vigorously. After 40 minutes of lovemaking, more than the last 3 sessions together, she finally agreed to answer her husband's curious questions about a date with her former lover. No, we didn't do anything. We just ate and went for a walk to the river. Yes, he took a step, put his arm around my shoulder, touched my knee. I didn't answer him in kind. Of course, he turned me on. What do you think I was doing? But I'm not sure it would be wise to continue. Why? Well, what if I fall in love with him again? I love you too much for this to happen. Or what if he hurts me again? What then? Will tried to calm her down. I know that you love me. It's not about love, it's about passion, just about fun. If you start getting too carried away, I'll see it. I'll tell you to stop. You have me, how can you get hurt? As Terry fell asleep, she knew he was right, but she still wasn't sure what, if anything, she was going to do. Over the next week, Terry reflected on her desires, concerns, and options. Other than accepting her increased sexual activity and gratifying it as needed, which was, of course, a very pleasant duty, Will did not try to influence her decisions. In this regard, he turned out to be a very wise husband. He understood that this was her body, and although he was more than willing to share it with Paul, he knew that any actions had to be her own choice. The solution came in the form of a voice message on her cell phone 12 days after the dinner. Hi, this is Paul. Just wanted to know if you were going to take me up on my offer. I looked into the old butcher shop. They have excellent lamb. Should I get a kilo? Call me back. 2 hours after she heard the message, she called Paul, already knowing what her answer would be, at least about the soup. Hi, Paul, she said when he answered. Got your message. Yes, I'd like to try it again. No, Friday isn't good for me. Will and I are going to a concert with another couple. Let me see. I don't have anything on the schedule for Tuesday evening. Is that right for you? Great. Should I bring something? Wine. Okay, see you then. Now it was time to break the news to Will. He was sitting in the living room, playing with his laptop. Honey, your bowling league starts on Tuesday, right? Yes, as usual. He had been playing in a league with friends for almost 10 years. Well, would you mind if I went to Paul's? He's going to make me some soup. Will laughed. Will she make you some soup? Is this what we call sex now? No, really, his mother made this wonderful French soup when I was a teenager. Paul says he knows how to cook it. Of course I don't mind. Do you think? I really don't know. We've already discussed this. There's a part of me that wants it, but I'm still worried. He hugged her. I know. Just remember that if something happens, I won't mind. Thank you. I love you. She parked in Paul's driveway. It was a small 2-story house on top of a hill at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was warm, hot actually, on a late August evening. Terry saw Paul at the door as he opened it and felt the cool air from the air conditioner. The aroma was appetizing meat and vegetables that had been simmering in the pan for several hours. Terry accepted the kiss on the cheek, allowing it to be a little warmer than last time, promising something or maybe nothing. You look great, Paul announced. She wondered if this was so, because she dressed rather casually, without any special intentions. Breeches below the knee, sleeveless blouse with a high collar, comfortable shoes. You too, she replied, handing him a bottle of Bordeaux. He was wearing shorts and a polo shirt. He opened the wine, poured a glass, and offered to give us a tour of the house. On the top floor, there was a small living room, a simple kitchen, and a bedroom with a full bathroom. On the lower floor, there are 2 small bedrooms, a toilet with a squeezed-in shower, and a garage. He led her into the backyard, which went down to the left, and trees surrounded the site on both sides. Bushes hid the neighboring houses. Nice place, Terry said. How long have you lived here? We bought it when Julie was pregnant for the first time. We thought about moving to a bigger house, but it never made sense. The boys hated him when they were teenagers. He was really too small, but we managed. When we divorced, Julie didn't want to leave him, so I stayed here. It's just right for a bachelor. There were still traces of a woman's hand in the house, pastel trim in the kitchen, floral wallpaper in the bedroom. The soup was ready in 15 minutes, and they sat at the kitchen table, not too close to each other, to chat. Are you a foreign language teacher? Yes, Italian and French. Sometimes I teach English literature classes or something like that. Do you still love Italy? I remember how your parents took you there the summer before my graduation. Absolutely. I went back there for a whole month while studying with a friend, and we had a great time. She remembered a boy in an Umbrian town, but of course, she didn't tell Paul about it. "What about you? Have you spent your entire career in a bank?" "They treat me well. I worked my way up from a cashier to a branch manager, then moved to the head office. I've worked my way up to executive vice president, and I think I'll retire in 10 years, unless we get swallowed up by some big bank and I get laid off." They had dinner at the kitchen table. The soup was delicious, served with warm slices of baguette, just as Terry remembered. Only, of course, with a glass of rich red wine, something that Mrs. Herbert would never allow. The conversation continued and became a little more frank. "Remember when we went to the arts festival and it rained on us?" asked Paul. "Oh yes, we were soaked to the skin." She immediately remembered how they then went to her house, hung up their clothes to dry and spent 2 wonderful hours in her bed. She was sure Paul remembered it too. Terry finished her portion, allowed Paul to talk her into taking half a refill, and gratefully accepted the offer to take the leftovers home with her. She sat while he cleared the table, putting dishes in the dishwasher. "It's so beautiful outside," Paul suggested. When they went out, she was impressed by the darkness, surrounded by trees, the flashes of fireflies, and the comfort of soft pillows on the rocking chair. Terry knew what would happen next. She waited for Paul's first move, his hand on her shoulder. And now she felt that the decisive moment was approaching. She still hasn't decided how this evening will end. If she was going to stop him, the time was now. Paul pressed her to him, she obeyed, but did not give him any other concession, turning her back slightly to him. She let him talk about places he considered romantic: warm resorts, New Orleans, the California coast. Their glasses were empty. Paul offered to open another bottle. This may have been the moment Terry gave up, looking back. However, the thought just flashed through her head that a little wine would be nice. But as soon as Paul returned, she felt her mouth go dry, her heart beat a little louder, and her skin became especially sensitive to the light breeze. When Paul sat down again, Terry returned to her previous position, her back pressed against his chest, but something seemed more intimate, more romantic. "Did Julie ever find out about our affair?" Terry asked, turning to Paul. "No, I think not. Of course, I didn't tell her. Maybe she suspected. She found out about another affair I was having a few years later. There was a big scandal because of this, and I found out that she had a lover about 5 years before we divorced. Have you ever had an affair?" "No, I've never had an affair." It was a little lie. Jonathan was not an affair. She justified herself mentally. "Would you like to?" Paul asked with a playful note in his voice. "Why are you suggesting that?" Her tone was no less playful. Paul had been waiting for such a moment and immediately seized it. He turned to her, lifted her face, and kissed her. Terry didn't resist. On the contrary, she helped him by opening her lips, turning her chest towards him so that her body pressed against his. Paul was persistent, quickly moving forward, his hands caressing her body, rising higher and higher. Terry realized that the moment she had been waiting for had arrived. She had to make a decision. Until this moment, she felt that she retained freedom of choice. At this moment, she was still unsure which path she would choose, and then she took his hand and raised it to her chest. "I waited so long for this, Terry. I didn't know if it would happen again." "I know," she whispered. Paul continued to act, no longer wasting time on doubts, fearing that she would suddenly change her mind and stop him. His hands slid under her blouse, found her bra, and quickly moved it to the side. This encouraged him, and he continued. His hand moved lower, exploring her body until it reached her waist, and the shorts tucked into the waistband also began to move down. "Don't you think we'd be more comfortable in the bedroom?" He smiled at her, stood up, and, taking her hand, led her through the kitchen to the bedroom. As they entered, Terry glanced at the bed, feeling the tension building within her. Paul stood in front of her. His eyes were burning, and in them she saw a long-forgotten passion. "Do you remember how I undressed in front of you?" she whispered, remembering her youth. "I remember." His voice was hoarse. "There will be no sexy dance today," she said with a smile, unbuttoning her blouse. Under her clothes, she was wearing plain cotton underwear, not sexy, But Paul didn't care. They didn't take their eyes off each other. Both began to undress, as if it were a ritual followed by the inevitable. Soon they were naked, and Paul wasted no time in leaning towards her, pressing his lips to her neck, moving down her chest, touching her body at the same time. She shuddered from his every touch, from every kiss. Everything seemed so familiar, yet new. Paul laid her down on the bed, pressing his body against her, and she whispered again, "You need to put on a condom." "You've never asked for this before," he said in surprise. "That was before everything we learned about HIV, she answered quietly. Paul complied, and a few minutes later he was back at her side. They moved slowly, as if testing whether their bodies remembered the sensations they had felt so long ago. She adjusted to his rhythm, and he gave himself completely to her. Terry felt her inner feelings begin to fade into the background, giving way to physical pleasure. Her body responded to every movement, to every breath he took. They lay next to each other, not wanting to be separated. Paul held her in his arms, their bodies still entwined, breathing in sync. A few minutes later, when he carefully pulled away, she sighed quietly, realizing that it was all over. "Oh, look at the time," she said, slightly surprised. "Almost 10. "Would you like to stay?" Paul suggested, hoping for a continuation. "I would like to, but what do I tell Will? He's probably already wondering where I am. I'll have to come up with some kind of excuse," she replied, pulling on her clothes. "Is it difficult to have an affair? You've had a lot of them. This is the first for me." Paul shrugged. "It depends. You have to be careful, that's all." "Calls, letters?" she asked thoughtfully. "Something like that. Are you going to see me again?" Paul looked at her carefully, realizing that he was asking an important question. "I wish I could," Terry admitted, and the truth surprised her a little. "You know, I didn't know I was getting into bed with you when I arrived tonight." "But you wanted it," Paul laughed. "Yes, I admit that," she replied with a smile, buttoning her blouse. "But I'm still not sure it's a good idea." "I want to see you again," Paul said, his voice sounding sincere. "I'll make it right, don't worry. You shouldn't worry about your reputation. This is my promise." Terry thought. Her hand was already on the doorknob. She knew that his words were meant to reassure her, but something inside told her that this was not just an affair, that this could go further than she had planned. "Thank you. I'll think about it and let you know." With these words, she walked out the door and went home. As Terry drove home, she tried to sort out her feelings. What happened to Paul brought her physical satisfaction, but in her heart she felt mixed emotions. The anticipation of what awaits her next caused a certain trepidation and anxiety at the same time. She understood that an affair with Paul could become something much more than just meeting for sex. But was she ready for that? Arriving home, she saw that Will was still awake, and she prepared herself for the inevitable conversation. He sat in the living room with a cup of tea. His gaze was calm, but there was interest in it. "How did it go?" he asked, smiling softly as she entered the room. Terry put her bag on the table and, taking a deep breath, sat down opposite her husband. "We had dinner, then sat in the yard, and yes, I let him seduce me." Will nodded as if he already knew the answer. "And how was it?" he asked, showing neither jealousy nor judgment. "It was good," she answered with a little confusion, realizing that she could not convey the full range of sensations that she experienced. "But probably not in the way I expected. Not so relaxed." Will leaned forward, his gaze becoming a little more attentive. "Are you happy with your decision?" Terry thought for a moment. She tried to figure out if this was what she really wanted or just a passing desire. "It's hard to say. On the one hand, I felt like I was young again, remembering our past romance. But on the other hand, it wasn't quite what I imagined." "What are you going to do now?" Will asked, his voice full of concern but not pressure. Terry sighed as she considered her options. She knew that Paul wanted to see her again, that their relationship could become something deeper, but she wasn't sure if that was what she wanted. "He asked me to meet again," she admitted, crossing her arms over her chest as if protecting herself from her own thoughts. But I don't know, Will. I feel like I might be getting too carried away with this. What if I start to fall in love with him? What then? Will looked at her carefully. Seriousness was visible in his eyes. Terry, I think you already know the answer yourself. I trust you and your decisions. But if you feel like it might go further than you want, maybe you should stop before it's too late. She knew he was right. The floor gave her feelings she couldn't ignore, but were those feelings something she wanted to relive? She remembered the pain she experienced after their first affair and realized that she did not want to go through that again. "You're right, as always," she finally said, getting up from her chair and walking over to Will. She leaned towards him and hugged him, feeling his warmth and support give her confidence in the right decision. "Thank you for understanding me." Will hugged her back, gently stroking her back. "Always, darling, I'm here for you." They stood there in an embrace for a few moments until Terry felt that she felt better. She knew she would have to talk to Paul and explain her feelings to him before things went too far. Terry decided to wait a few days before contacting Paul again. She needed time to finally sort out her thoughts. During these days, Will did not try to insist on her decision, did not ask unnecessary questions. He was simply there, ready to support her in any outcome. 3 days later, she called Paul. She called not from a mobile phone so as not to leave traces, but from a work phone at school when no one was around. "Hi, Paul," she said when he answered. "Hi, Terry." There was joy in his voice. "I'm so glad to hear from you. When will we meet again?" She fell silent for a few seconds, gathering her courage. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she knew she had to be honest. "Paul, I think we need to talk." She paused, trying to find the right words. "I'm not sure I can continue this. What happened between us was special, but I don't want it to go too far." Paul paused, trying to understand what she meant. "Are you saying this was our last time?" There was a note of disappointment in his voice. "I think so," she answered quietly. "I value what I have with Will too much, and I don't want to be in the same situation again that I was in many years ago." Paul was silent for a long time before he finally spoke again. "I understand. I don't want to hurt you. You are important to me, and if this is your decision, I will accept it." Terry felt her tension begin to subside. She didn't expect it to end so easily, but she was grateful to Paul for his understanding. "Thank you," she said with relief. "I really appreciate it." "Then perhaps we can remain friends," Paul suggested, his voice softer. "I think it's possible," Terry replied, although deep down she knew it was unlikely. After talking with Paul, Terry felt both relieved and sad. The decision was right, but there was still a feeling of loss, as if part of her past was left behind again, but this time forever. She knew that returning to her old relationship with Paul would be a mistake, because her marriage to Will was what she truly valued. When she returned home that evening, Will greeted her with his usual knowing smile. He seemed to have already guessed that she had spoken to Paul. "Did you get everything settled?" he asked, gently hugging her shoulders. "Yes, I talked to him," she replied, leaning against him. "He accepted my decision, and now it's over." Will looked into her eyes, his gaze full of concern. "Are you okay?" Terry nodded, but there was still a mixed feeling in her heart, joy that she had made the right choice, and a slight sadness from the loss of those feelings that she had for Paul once upon a time. "I think so," she finally answered, her voice quiet but confident. "It was the right decision, and I feel like I don't want to bring up the past anymore." "I'm proud of you," Will said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You are a very brave woman, Terry." She smiled, feeling the warmth and support he always gave her. She was lucky to have such a husband, and she understood it perfectly. Several weeks passed, and life returned to its usual course. Terry and Will continued to live together, enjoying quiet evenings and long conversations. Terry was no longer worried about her feelings for Paul. She knew that phase of her life was over, and she was grateful for that. But memories of their past romance sometimes returned to her, like shadows of distant events. One evening, as he and Will sat on the couch, discussing plans for the weekend, he suddenly asked, "You don't think about Paul anymore?" Terry thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes I think, but not like before. Now I see it differently. It was part of my past, but not what I want in the present." Will smiled, clearly satisfied with her answer. "I'm glad to hear that." They fell silent, enjoying the silence and closeness of each other. After some time, Will added, "You know, I still want you to always feel like you can be honest with me. If you ever have these feelings for someone else again, just tell me." Terry looked at him gratefully. "I promise that I will always be honest with you. You are the most important thing in my life, and I don't want to lose that." They hugged, and Terry felt like she had finally closed that chapter of her life that had once occupied so much of her thoughts and feelings. Now she knew that what she had with Will was much more valuable and deeper than anything she could have had with Paul or anyone else. At that moment, she realized that their marriage was based on the trust they had built over the years, and this trust became the most important thing for her. She no longer felt the need to go back in time. Instead, she was ready to build a future with Will, knowing that they had many more happy years ahead of them together. With the onset of winter, life went on as normal for Terry and Will. Sometimes she met people from the past, but she no longer felt the same feelings for them that she once felt. She learned to let go and enjoy what she had. And every time she remembered her romance with Paul, she smiled with slight nostalgia, knowing that everything turned out the way it should have been. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.